Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. We are just going to give ourselves a minute or two for all of our attendees to drop in and join us, and then we will kick off very momentarily. In the meantime, we'll be right with you. Alrighty, why don't we get started? As I said previously, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, depending on where you are joining us this afternoon. Welcome to the PreSales Collective. Welcome to today's webinar for the APAC region. My name is Chris Ty. I'm a Senior Director here at salesforce.org, and I'm your host for today, and we've got a fantastic session for you today, really focused on giving back. We're really looking at how our pre-sales professionals within the industry can start making an impact beyond their day-to-day sales role, how they can take that idea of volunteering and pro bono work, utilize their day-to-day skill set to make a bigger impact in the world. So I'm joined today by three fantastic panelists. I'll introduce you to them very momentarily. But before we do that, I'm just going to kick off with a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. First and foremost, I do want to sit there and say thank you. Thank you for everyone who is joining our webinar today, watching this recording, or just part of our community. PreSales Collective would not exist without you, and really looking to elevate the pre-sales role worldwide. We really need your engagement, and we really want to hear from what makes it the best role in the industry out there. So thank you again for your attendance and your involvement, and please take that as a very, very welcome message to get the most out of today's webinar. Please be active in the chat. I can't tell you enough how much all of us have probably spent the last 12 months or 18 months sitting on Zooms and webinars, and there is nothing more daunting than sitting there shouting into the void and not hear anything back. So if you do have any questions today, please do not be afraid to throw them up in the chat window. We will ask the panelists, we will try and do our best to answer them today. And hopefully you walk away understanding how you can get involved in this really deserving and important sector that you may or may not be involved with already. And so with that, let me talk a little bit about today's challenge. I guess in coming together for this webinar, one of the things that struck me is really, these are unprecedented times. There is huge demand for, people moving to the digital world. We're looking at, how we can give more. There's so much need out there at the moment. And so the challenge is, from a recent nonprofit report, is 75% of nonprofits out there are seeing a huge increased demand for their programs through the pandemic. They're being limited by the fact that 93% of them state that their IT or technical staff is a challenge to the organization's adoption of technologies. And we're hearing 74% of those nonprofits are reporting constituents wanting to participate and give back more and more. And that is just increased perpetually over the last 5 years. And so we're really seeing an industry that's crying out for help. We're seeing an industry that needs people to put their hand up and get involved. And really, we want to see an industry that takes advantage of the skills that we as pre-sales professionals have to offer. And so as we do that, I thought that is a fantastic topic to talk about with some pre-sales professionals, as well as professionals from the nonprofit industry. And so I give you today's panel. Please join me in welcoming Casey, Sean, and Kristen to the panel today. And I'll go around and get them all to introduce themselves a little bit more. But Casey, why don't you jump off mute and introduce yourself? Casey, you're a Principal Success Manager at salesforce.org. Maybe tell us a little about yourself and what that role entails, because I know you've been in pre-sales before your current role.
Thanks, Chris, and hey, everyone. Yep, my name is Casey, and I'm privileged to be a success manager working at salesforce.org. As a success manager, my role specifically is to work with nonprofit and education institutions and make sure that they are successful using our platform. Success can be relative, so making sure that they have defined what success looks like, and that we're working with each of them to meet their goals and really achieve the missions of their organization. And we do that in a variety of different ways, but also by creating connections amongst a larger community, many of whom are part of the PreSales collective. Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Fantastic. And I know you've been in a pre-sales role before. Do you want to share a little bit about your history in pre-sales? I know you had a fantastic manager previously, but beyond that, maybe a bit of insight.
Absolutely. Cool. And it's actually kind of a fun story how I connect with some of the others on the panel here today. So I actually come from a professional services background, and would do, when I moved to Australia 6 years ago, was doing professional services implementations. There was a need, I was actually working at Blackbaud with Sean. There's a need for some solution engineering, and because I knew the use cases and I knew the product, it allowed me to transition into that role. And I love the role so much that I continued on in that kind of a function, and migrated across to Salesforce. So I've had the pleasure to serve our nonprofits in a couple of different roles, and it's wonderful that pre-sales allows me that kind of transferable skills to migrate around, essentially. Yeah.
Fantastic. And yeah, I think those skills that you've brought in to our organization as well as to the customers and industry in general have been fantastic. You know, irrespective of the employer, I think your insight has been incredibly valuable for everyone. And I know you're really focused on the mission of helping the nonprofits in whatever you've been doing, which is fantastic. So that's probably a good segue just to introduce our second panelist, Sean. Sean, you're a principal solutions architect at the Blackbaud organisation here in Sydney. Although you're not in Sydney today, you'll find ourselves one of the many lucky ones to be travelling at the moment, which is fantastic. Do you want to share a little bit about your background, your current role in pre-sales, and how you found yourself in the nonprofit industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So so principal solutions architect at Blackbaud Pacific, have been based in Sydney for, just had my 6-year anniversary, which is very, very nice. And been in the pre-sales role for the last about 2 or 3 years. The role itself is really a bit of a hybrid between pure pre-sales, assisting with professional services, and also doing a lot of training, training being really where I have a lot of my background. Before I moved to Australia, when I was working for Blackbaud in the US, I was a trainer for the company for a number of different years on a number of different products. Before I actually joined Blackbaud, I'm actually approaching 10 years now, which is pretty crazy. I was in the nonprofit space as a database administrator for about 6.5 years. And I really came to nonprofits because I have a theater background, oddly enough, actually. And from there, I started working in theater box offices, found that just because I always had a lot of technical skill, that really led directly into the database administration role, which then fed directly into the Blackbaud space, where I've expanded beyond just the arts and cultural vertical into dealing with all of our different sorts of clients.
So it sounds like a fairly common theme in terms of falling into pre-sales, not necessarily knowing of it from the outset or as it being a goal, but finding you're the technical one in the room, in the audience, and more than happy to sort of take up that mantle and go forward.
Exactly. Yeah, and I find that pre-sales is really an interesting spot because it's a little bit training. It's also at times really highly technical, and I find that it's always such a difficult balance to find someone who can kind of do both. You get people who are really technical who may not really necessarily be able to express concepts, but on the training side, you aren't necessarily always focusing on the highly technical points. So it's really been a fascinating combination of the two.
Definitely agreed. One to the next, and suddenly presentations. Look, our last and final panelist today is certainly a special guest for us on here. Kristen. Kristen is the head of continuous improvement at Canteen Australia, a fantastic nonprofit based here in Australia and in Sydney. Kristen, you've come from a commercial world, and over the last few years, you've found yourselves in the nonprofit, working in the nonprofit industry through contracts, and eventually now into a permanent role at Canteen. What's your experience been like making that move, and how have you found that nonprofit industry?
Yes, Thanks, Chris. So I've been lucky enough to be solely focused in the not-for-profit sector for the last 5 years or so. Originally, just as an independent consultant working for a number of NFPs. And then I came to Canteen about 2.5 years ago on a 3-month contract because they were in a world of pain, technically and from a CRM perspective. And then 2.5 years later, I'm still there. So that says a lot, I think. A consultant, you know, I am a true consultant. I love change. I love working on different projects. So to stay anywhere for nearly 3 years is quite significant. What I found in coming into the not-for-profit sector, I was shocked, but, you know, at how much they're crying out for skilled people to just assist them in this data and tech space across the board. And I think that doesn't matter if they're a very small not-for-profit who I've done some work for, or if you're at the larger scale like we are at Canteen. Every NFP needs more skilled people to help guide and work with them, particularly in the technology space, because as your previous slide showed, Chris, there are very few NFPs that have, you know, in-house full-time data and tech resources.
Yeah, I certainly agree in my interactions with the non-profit industry. I think that's certainly something we've found, and I'm sure the other panelists do as well. Maybe I completely should have asked this up front. Kristen, can you share a little bit about what Canteen Australia does for anyone that's not familiar with them, for anyone maybe beyond Australia across APAC?
Yes, of course. So we support young people impacted by cancer. So that's whether they themselves have had cancer or whether someone in their family has had cancer. So we provide a lot of services and programs, engagement of young people who are impacted by any form of cancer. We're fairly large as far as not-for-profits go in Australia, which, you know, has its benefits, particularly in the space that I work in. But we're also really keen to share our lessons and knowledge out to other not-for-profits, and that's probably something I've noticed which is different from the private sector. Although we compete in some way, there's very much an openness to sharing lessons and learnings amongst the community of NFPs.
So it's a little more, it's, yeah, very small industry. It's not competitive quite in the same sense as the commercial sector as your experience. Is there anything else from that commercial space? Do the needs differ? Is the skills that are required? You mentioned, you know, you do need more skilled resources to support the mission of, you know, Canteen Australia and no doubt other non-profits. What is that take on, you know, how it differs from that commercial sector?
I think what surprised me initially is how many people had only ever worked in the not-for-profit sector. They were doing amazing jobs in things like fundraising and other areas, but they had no idea of what's possible, or that, you know, that process that they'd been following for 15 years was completely outdated, and there was very easy changes that we could make that would change, you know, the way that they worked. So just that lack of understanding around what technology can do to help improve their way of working, which allows them then to move on to value-adding activities. So the amount of manual processing shocked me, and that still goes on today. I'd never seen as many Excel spreadsheets that people were plugging data in and out of multiple times. I think we've moved on slightly, particularly with COVID. Everyone's recognised the need to push to digital, you know, to engage our supporters, but as often as well, like for a business like Canteen, to engage our young people, because all of our face-to-face engagement went. So there's this real knowledge and desire that we all need to move to the digital world, but actually knowing how to do that is where the biggest gap I see right now for most not-for-profits.
Okay, yeah, I think there's certainly, yeah, a lot of a lot of parallels in there. And maybe if I throw to KC and let me drop the screen sharing for a moment. KC, I know you've been in a fundraising role previously and you've had different experiences working for nonprofits directly. Have you had a similar experience? Has that been, have you had different takes on what the nonprofit sector means and working with them in whether it's, volunteering pro bono or directly for them?
No, I think actually to echo, I think everything that Kristen has said, I found that to be very, very, very common. So, I have, prior to working in technology for fundraising, I did work for a number of different nonprofits in a variety of different roles, some tech, some fundraising, some community program management. And it's the exact same thing. It's you have people who they may be attracted to the mission of the organization, which is fantastic, and we love that. I think what sometimes happens, and this is just my experience and observation, but you have people who are drawn to the role, and they may not be, they may not necessarily have all the skills that are needed in the role. You may have, because they're nonprofit, they can't be as competitive, so there's trouble in actually attracting the right folks to that kind of a role. And then I actually just shared on LinkedIn this just the other day that the investment back into people as well in nonprofits is very, very low. So they're not actually kind of investing in their people, and this idea of enablement we have at larger companies doesn't necessarily exist, at least in my experience. And so this does create this giant need for people to come in and take a look. And it's I think a thread that I picked up that Chris was speaking to is that it's not necessarily coming in and saying, here's what this application can do. It's cool and it's good to kind of get people's minds turning a bit, but actually just to kind of say, take a step back from the process that you're doing. Does it seem right to you? Does it seem to make sense? And actually kind of bringing that kind of new perspective. It actually starts with that kind of change management and the process and people side of things before we even introduce technology. Because look, there's a lot of great technology out there that can do amazing things. And I think that's where the skill set of pre-sales comes in, because that means that we can actually leverage those fantastic discovery skills to kind of understand it at a much deeper level.
Yeah, and I think that idea of investing in people is an interesting one. Sean, you've worked with a lot of nonprofits. You're obviously in that industry. Seeing the investment in people and process and technology, what's your perception of why do people stay in the nonprofit industry? Why do they keep working with these organizations if that investment is not there, whether it's budget and technology for to create their mission, or just that sense of purpose?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it really comes down to believing in the mission to a great degree. And, it is very different knowing that you are changing lives when you're dealing with cause cure organizations, that you are really making a huge change on the world. I think to some extent, because as I believe Kristen said, so many people in the nonprofit industry have just stayed there, that it's more momentum more than anything. So it can certainly be a combination of the two, but we have some people who have been at the same organization, not even different not-for-profit organizations, for 15, 20, 25 years. And yeah, their process is very well maybe 15 years old, but because they don't necessarily have that external view, it can be very difficult. So even separating that pre-sales people have a unique skill set, they have a unique approach to their different use cases as they go into these engagements. The simple fact that they have an external viewpoint, I think alone is going to be invaluable to everyone within the industry.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot, I guess, of you also hear similar tenure and involvement in public sector. People
Exactly.
with government or public service for 20, 30 their entire careers and just don't have that external perspective. And so, yeah, again, my hope is we can sit there and tap into this fantastic pre-sales professional organization and community to bring in some of that commercial mindset and approach to maybe reinvigorate or bring fresh ideas into the sector to the benefit of the mission, as you say.
Yeah, it's really
Kristen,
remarkable because
sorry.
you'll have two different organizations that have effectively the same mission, slightly different, but basically you have a lot of people who may switch between the two different organizations, but their operations can be 100% different. You'll have two universities that are down the street from one another who approach things in 100% different ways. So it's also really interesting that there isn't like a nonprofit way of doing things. Often it's this is something we came up with. Maybe that was 10 months ago, maybe that was 10 years ago, and we're just going to keep rolling with it. So I think it all really comes back to understanding their core use cases and making sure you can address those, because each organization is maybe somewhat differently dysfunctional in their own way.
Oh, we're all a little bit dysfunctional. I think we can agree on that, maybe. I was going to ask Kristen, as the non-profit, member of our panel today, have you had experience at Canteen with volunteers, with pro bono projects that you've brought in external people to get involved and work on?
Yes, we have. So I was lucky enough to meet Casey through the pro bono program that Salesforce run. So that was our first foray, and Casey, that must be two and a half years ago now, maybe longer. And that was at a time when I was fairly new to Canteen as well. And as I mentioned, we were in a world of pain. So it was an amazing, thing to meet someone like Casey, who really just ended up, and we continue to this day, I find, almost as a partner, someone who can help out with any questions. So I would almost see Casey almost now as a little bit of a consultant, personal sounding board for me, which is great in my role when we're dealing with Salesforce. But yeah, also just a wonderful wealth of knowledge. And, interestingly, my background is Salesforce. So when you talk about not-for-profit, I probably, am seen as someone who has an extensive knowledge of this space. So for other organizations where, they may be rolling out something like a Salesforce or a Blackboard product, you may, more often than not, you're dealing with the fundraising manager who has no technical background whatsoever, and that's where I think we've got to be very careful. So you might share something with them and they nod and say, oh, okay. They actually have no idea what it is you're actually talking about, more often than not, if it's quite technical, and they certainly don't understand what questions they should be asking to really make sure that that solution or product is a good fit. So I would just throw that out there as a word of caution, that don't assume that we're all on the same page. But going back to, we've also had great success with volunteers in our data science space. So bringing on even interns for a 3-month engagement, working with our data scientists, allowing them to enhance their own skill sets as well as delivering some value to Canteen. So we're very open to having, working with people in a volunteering capacity, with the key thing being, as long as we can see that it's a mutually beneficial arrangement and there's a specific piece of work or area that they can focus on, would probably be my main thing.
Yeah, I think that's been a recurring message through our conversations, is that idea of it needs to be specific. It needs not to be just an open engagement where there is no defined end. It is just keep going on and on and on, and you don't have that sense of accomplishment or bringing something to an end. I guess it's a little bit like an implementation. You want to have those, that end goal in sight, and how do you measure that success? Sean or KC, either one of you, I guess you've both operated, in service delivery, in pre-sales. You've both been, heavily through volunteering and pro bono work. When you do work with nonprofits, have you seen what has been your experience with that volunteering side of things? Have you, seen a different side to that, or gone in with that mindset of it needs to be very fixed and purposeful in what you're engaging in?
So I think probably what I would say is, and actually picking up from what Kristen was sharing, not every organization I think has the digital maturity of Canteen or someone like Kristen that kind of does that sort of almost triaging of the resource coming in to kind of say, are they going to do what we need them to do? What kind of a viewpoint do they have? Because there's such a desperate need for help out there, so many will just kind of take what they can get. And I've seen, in my experience, has kind of been, because I'll have gone into organizations where I'm maybe the second or the third or the first person, and I'm kind of cleaning up the mess of the first and second or third person. So I think that's something I kind of notice is that, having nonprofits understand that they can kind of say no and kind of guide some of that work is good. And also being able to, as a volunteer, be able to say, I could do that, but actually I don't think you're asking for the right thing, and having that be more of a dialogue and a capacity building as opposed to kind of a Band-Aid fixed. That's, I think, been my experience.
So it's not just following what they think is blindly following what they think is necessary. It is using that critical judgment, and to the point, to point of our community, those pre-sale skills. Listening to Kristen, your commentary before about things like even discovery, just sitting there and listening and trying to understand really what is the crux of the challenge at heart here, and how do we solve that, irrespective of technology. Sometimes it is the process, it is the function that you're going through to help them out.
And I've seen a lot of not-for-profits get into trouble because they just want to replicate what they've always been doing. So again, in this discovery phase, actually explaining that they could look at something with a completely different lens, and then how that might add value down the track is really important. Even when they do invest in technology, they often not-for-profits don't get value out of it because they just try and make it do what their legacy platform did. So I think that's again where people with pre-sales skills can really help guide that so that doesn't happen.
I think that's an important point, and I think maybe for any of you to sort of respond to it, how have you overcome that? I guess that's user adoption, right? That's change management going into a non-profit. What's your experience been like with that process? Are they willing to change? Are they open to that? Is it scary, given that some of them don't have the digital maturity that we might expect from a commercial, large multinational?
Yeah, I mean, I would really say that change management is right up there as the single most daunting part of any implementation. And even in the immediate post go live or a couple of years down the line, change management can be really difficult because people are used to the processes that they have. I really think, and it can be tough to do so, but trying to get across them the benefits of what the new change is going to have. So whenever I'm in an engagement, I really try to focus on all of these are the manual operations, like Kristen said, with spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet everywhere, to saying, if we can automate this, you can focus on your strategy. If you have an easier way to enter the new gifts that you receive, then that means you're not going to be doing these really manual, unpleasant processes all the time. If you're a manager, you can get data in your hands and make better strategic choices. So, we say, yes, change management is going to be a very difficult and often confusing process, but try to stay with us. And at the end, here are all the big benefits that you're going to get once we implement that solution.
And change management as a skill, I think, is something that pre-sales certainly dabbles in and takes into consideration when we're talking. So I think that's definitely something that the community can bring to the conversation as well. Sorry, Casey, you look like you were about to jump in.
I was inspired a little bit. I think there's also maybe a difference between, so there's a difference, I think, between the scope of work that like a skilled volunteer can do versus, implementing a technology platform, right? So there's a degree of change management that you can kind of do in these sort of things versus if it becomes a larger piece of work, you can still do that work as part of a larger organization and still have that be a pro bono thing. But in that case, it's being treated like a project, like a proper project. And it's kind of a different thing than an individual going in as a skilled volunteer. So I think that understanding the scope of it is important, as well as I think not pushing too far. I think that with change management, a crawl, walk, run approach is good. And I also think that because like we're all kind of, most of us are here for because we represent technology companies, you know, there's a degree of change management that is healthy, and then there's a degree of change management that's, we'll just use our platform. So I think that we also kind of have to balance that ourselves and realize that we're going in, we are guests in someone's home. We have the privilege to be able to lend our skills to do this. And we kind of need to separate that a little bit from, you know, because we all think that our platform is the best thing on the planet. And often cases they may be, but we also, that may not be the right path for them at that time. And I think we really need to interrogate that very carefully, and also have, again, an open dialogue and understand where the customer is. If they're nodding along and, you know, they don't actually understand, then no matter how great that engagement could be, you're probably not going to be successful, and you might actually leave the nonprofit in a world of pain.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I know in your current role you talk a lot about, you know, talked a lot to implementation partners and people that are sort of looking to go in to drive, you know, deliver success from a project and from an industry perspective. How do you convey that message of do no harm? Like, people are very enthusiastic. They want to put in, you know, as you say, the technology which they're familiar with. Sometimes that does cause, you know, upheaval or big changes. Do you have a message for the team in terms of, you know, making sure they do no harm, or you know, do it safely, I guess?
I mean, I would probably say it all begins with understanding. To me, I would much rather approach it from I need to ask a bunch of questions around what it is they're doing and what their goals are, and finding the solution that way, and really just try to forget as much as I can about the background that doesn't involve asking good questions. Really try to get a feel for what is it that is going to benefit this organization. It doesn't matter what the potential solutions are going to be. I need to find who this organization currently is and where they are going, and whatever questions I can do to gather that will be the best result for them.
Yeah, sorry, Kristen, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I think, you know, in the world that we all work in, particularly in the, you know, digital data tech space, you know, everything's possible, but it's then also being realistic as to the bandwidth of the organization to cope with what you're suggesting. One of my biggest frustrations was when I came in was, you know, the vision that had been sold, or yeah, everything's possible. If you want us to do it, we'll do it. So, you know, when I came in, I'm like, why are we doing it that way? Oh, because they asked for it. So I think there needs to be, you know, that sanity checking when you have potentially, you know, stakeholders who don't really actually understand what they're asking for. You need to probe that a little bit further and offer guidance, so we don't end up with, you know, any kind of solution, whatever that may be, process or solution, that's not best practice. Because if you don't know what best practice is, you're never actually going to be asked for that to be delivered. So again, in this pre-sales, you know, capacity, that's when you can actually give guidance, because I really think quite often smaller not-for-profits are screaming out for someone to say, in my opinion, you should probably consider doing this, as opposed to just saying, here are your 10 options, tell us which one you like. I know we do that as well, but you've got to give them more so they can be guided as to what the pros and cons of each might be. And then you might say, in my opinion, I would go down this path for this reason. That then helps with the change management. It's certainly something that we've done at Canteen. And also identifying something that can be a quick win that would show them fairly quickly, oh wow, if we actually change, we get this. And you'd be shocked at how simple that is. To your point, Sean, it's like automating the thank you receipt rather than having someone sit in Outlook and type, cut and paste it. You know, that sort of thing still goes on. So identifying, getting those runs on the board quickly then really helps with people then getting on board with what you're suggesting and trusting you more to then, you know, go into those bigger projects.
Yeah, and that ties in really lovely with a comment from Roz in the chat window, which I think we all need to bear in mind. You know, when we're going to help our NFPs, we should really be following best practice and document the solutions we provide. I think that's a baseline expectation and absolutely one of the golden rules we should sort of adopt if we're looking to get involved in the sector. I guess we've been talking about skills and you know, skills-based volunteering and pro bono is obviously something really important that we can do from, you know, take our day-to-day roles and make a bigger impact. Kristen, what are the sort of in-demand skills you've seen? I know you sort of mentioned canteens obviously a larger non-profit here in Australia. You probably are a little bit more mature. You know, have a bit more resource within your remit. But what are those, you know, skills, even the non-technical ones that are of benefit? It sounds like, you know, discovery might be one of those, but anything else jump to mind?
I think definitely discovery. You know, it's maybe helping them put together an actual roadmap that clearly specifies, well, what should we do in phase 1 and why? Then we will move on to phase 2. Quite often in not-for-profit, they would like to do everything all at once. So the notion of actually phasing out a program and why they should do that from a risk mitigation perspective. So yeah, there's very much, I guess, broadly speaking, a consulting aspect, a discovery aspect. Obviously, I also see that a lot of NFPs have invested in technologies and aren't actually getting any value out of them. So, and, you know, if you know that you have a specific skill set in a technology, you could come in and do a health check and actually make recommendations on how they could utilize that investment better. Obviously, everyone needs help with data, you know, reporting. If your skill set, you know, building reports is a massive area of need across the board. So anything that you can help in that regard. So I think there's many, you know, vendor management, you know, if they are going out to market, you know, that's a skill set that most NFPs do not have. And then they get sold the dream and, you know, often, and, you know, they do often spend a lot of money. And that was what was one of the most upsetting things for me when I first came into the sector, was how much money not-for-profits were spending on technology solutions that they either were not getting any value or were not fit for purpose. So having a trusted advisor, if they are going to invest in a significant sum of money in a certain area, would be highly valued skill as well. Helping them, what questions do you ask? I mean, what did that really mean when they said that? No, you know, because as I mentioned before, I think, you know, people don't know what questions to ask.
Yeah, and I think for an industry that's operating on, you know, mostly very thin margins, that, you know, any dollars they spent in the back of house is not going towards their mission, whether it's, you know, serving the community or providing support. So obviously, yeah, it's not an industry that makes these sort of investment decisions lightly. So we need to make sure they're getting the most out of that when they do. Right. Casey, Sean, again, from your experiences of engaging, it sounds like, you know, as we sort of say, that sort of consulting approach, even project management and delivery elements in there as well. What sort of skills have you sort of taken from your pre-sales world that you've used in some of those volunteering efforts or in with the nonprofit industry?
Yeah, so what I do a lot is, because I'm kind of straddling the fence between being purely pre-sales and also being a consultant / trainer, what we often do is when a client has been live for a few years is we will do like a data health check, not a data, I really should say process health check is probably the best way to really put it, where we will sit down for maybe a couple of days with our clients, and it's completely, you know, pro bono engagement. And we pretty much start by asking, what are your main pain points? What are the things that drive you crazy? This can be from executive leadership. This can be down to whoever, you know, who is doing the data entry. And also, what are your goals for the next 3, 6, 24 months, whatever it really may be. And we try to go team by team by team and just get those down, because with those two starting questions, we're then able to really identify what are the biggest headaches that we are facing and how can we really come up with a bit of a roadmap and how we can address all of those going forward. Again, it's a lot of those discovery bits of detail. And in that case, you don't really need to have a background in the non-for-profit space, because you're really just taking their words and diving into what those headaches are. So then they can really just have it really nicely laid out in a single document.
Anything else, Casey, from your perspective, to build on either of those comments?
I had something lined up, and I was just actually just Sean was saying it. So now, look, I think that from my perspective, the skills that I've used. So when I look back on some of the volunteering engagements that I've done, so I spent some time on a board of a small, very, very small choir that I was a part of. And so I was their technology manager, which was an interesting experience, because technology, some people knew what databases were, some people had heard of the internet, and others, you know, were just kind of coming to grips with electricity. So it was a really interesting experience. So, you know, definitely, I think there's a lot of project management in there. There was a lot of change management as well, and kind of just helping to there were some things that the organization needed to do in order to kind of keep their books in line and be able to operate as a membership driven organization where there are certain kind of legal requirements, as well as moving the rest of the organization, you know, out of the stage a little bit. So there was a little bit of that discovery piece, a little bit of that change management piece, a little bit of project management, and also just a little bit of storytelling, right? So in pre-sales, we're all about storytelling and setting that vision, which, so long as you can responsibly take someone on the journey, is okay. But I think that a lot of that storytelling aspect is a great way to help with that change management, particularly if you're working with an organization that is largely driven by volunteers, because a lot of the organizations that need a lot of help, they may not be, you know, at the scale of a canteen or even have paid employees. They may actually just be all volunteer based. So I find that kind of being able to tell a story and kind of threading impact and that sort of thing is a really great way to help bring everyone along on the journey.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's something to bear in mind for us all. I want to get to, I know we've sort of got, you know, 10 or 15 minutes left. I want to get to how we can encourage some of the community to get involved in there. But I think before touching on that, I just want to sort of maybe touch on some of the success we've seen or some of the impact from the volunteering and being involved. Maybe Kristen, if we start with you, you mentioned obviously you've had some volunteers and worked through Canteen. Has Canteen seen that impact from that volunteering? Is it a measurable success from their perspective, or is it just sort of thanks, but you know, we've got a lot going on and you know, it's just a small part of the big picture?
No, I mean, I think for most not-for-profits, you know, from tiny ones to larger ones, volunteering is critical across the board. So, you know, we have a manager solely focused on managing volunteers across, you know, all aspects of the business. So that's at that upper scale. So the notion of volunteering in the not-for-profit sector is critical and highly regarded, because as Casey said, you know, for many organisations, they can't survive without volunteers. So I think it's incredibly successful. I think it's a great thing. I think volunteering in more of this skilled capacity in the data and tech space is a little bit newer. You know, traditionally it might be someone coming in and doing some admin functions, or you're making a few phone calls, but I do feel like there's a real appetite now to sort of broaden it out to this space. And that's why it's so great that we're having this meeting, because I really feel most not-for-profits are screaming out for help. You know, and it's where I do see that pre-sales volunteers could help. And I think it's probably, if you were going to approach a not-for-profit, it would just be being fairly, you know, giving some good ideas in the areas that you could assist them. Like just going in and saying, hi, I can help, is probably not going to be as successful as, hi, I can help because my background's in this and I'd love to do X, Y, Z, or take a look at this, you know, for you.
It's a bit of prompting almost. It's here's the
Totally.
skills that I have available, you know, could any of these be of assistance for you?
Yes.
Sean, KC, I guess from your side, you know, have you seen the impact in some of the non-profits you've worked in or you've supported through your, you know, implementation and ongoing, what the impact of that volunteering or the pro bono work might be?
Do you just want the success stories, or?
Let's start there.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
It's like it is a wonderful feeling, you know, when particularly when you put something in place and you kind of walk away and you come back a little while later and they're still using maybe not all of it, but maybe some of it, right? So really just focusing on that kind of like crawl stage. And we've kind of like chipped away at that. So as Kristen said, reports. And I'm not talking about like the Power BIs or the tablets. I mean, just basic reporting. Every application has some kind of basic reporting. Basic reports, really, really, really helpful. I find that, you know, a lot of what I do, so working on a platform like Salesforce, is just a little bit of education about what a platform actually is. And I think that is going to be something that is common across, you know, all the different platforms that we work on. So that bit of education, because it helps them begin to understand the questions that they should be asking and the kinds of volunteers that they might want to engage. So even just that little bit of kind of opening their eyes a bit to what their options actually are, you know, I think that's really impactful. I've probably been most impacted by the work because, you know, after working with Canteen and some others, I moved from pre-sales into being able to do success, you know, for a living. So I think that we find that the impact is actually on ourselves as individuals, and the notion of the goodwill and the pride that we walk away with having, feeling like we've made an impact. So I think that the impact is actually more personal than it is on the nonprofit, essentially.
Definitely. Sean, anything else you'd like to add?
Not really. No, I think Casey really encapsulated that quite well. It's, you know, a lot of what I really do apart from those kind of larger health checks is when one of our current clients just messages us and say, you know, we're just curious about doing this way out of left field thing, and really just shepherding them along that process. And it's really great to see those results, especially when we can kind of teach them how to do it themselves instead of just saying, hey, here's a report, I hope it works for you. Really just saying, here is how you can learn to think the way that the system does, which can really have tremendous results down the line.
Excellent. I think that's a great message for everyone. We've got a few minutes left and we've got a couple of questions in here. I'm going to throw to the team and see who's got some suggestions for us. First question in here is from Paul. Paul writes, you know, after joining a new company, I'm wanting to enable pre-sales teammates to consider giving back by sharing their skills. Can you provide some sort of advice on getting our organisations to support the efforts to provide skills to nonprofits? Anyone got any insight, KC?
So I'll make the first pass at this. And it's maybe a little bit more of what not to do. But I think it's really important. So almost getting a a bit of a skills inventory going. So understanding the skills that you currently possess, whether it's technology skills on your platform or a bit broader than that, project management, change management, understanding what those skills that you currently possess are. So whilst fueled by good intention, if we're looking to develop new skills or practice skills on a nonprofit, don't do that. I think that because the work is unpaid for, there's almost sometimes an interpretation that there isn't necessarily a value to it, or that there isn't necessarily a risk to it, because if we don't pay for it, then at least they're getting something, even though it comes from a good intent. And I think that that's very, very dangerous, particularly given the kinds of work that these nonprofits do to serve people and families in very stressful situations. So I think that being realistic of the skills that you have, maybe being realistic with, look, we have some skills in this area. It's not maybe a strength of ours, but something we're developing, and being really, really open with that can work. But I think that trialing new skills is something that is something you want to avoid.
Fair comment, fair advice. Kristen?
I think another potential option is like partnering directly with a charity. So, charities are always looking for partnership opportunities, but it doesn't necessarily always mean like dollar values. So I've seen it work really nicely where you pick a not-for-profit that aligns to maybe your core values as an organization, and then you commit that you will give X number of hours a month, a year. Most charities would be really up for that kind of in-kind partnership, and it sort of puts a bit more structure around the engagement.
Fantastic, that's great advice. And funnily enough, ties into a second question in there. Once we do get going, how do we identify an organisation they can work with? And maybe this is sort of a broader topic of what are the ways that you've seen, or you've called out at Canteen, Kristen. How have you sought volunteers? Are you publicly putting a call out there? Are you partnering with organisations to get that to get that support you need?
We're doing both. I also sit on the board of another smaller charity, and either whether you're small or large, if you have a need, you often go on to seek volunteers. So I would actively encourage anyone to keep an eye out on what's coming up, and that's I've seen in the board position, putting up specific requests for skilled people in certain areas to join subcommittees, because it's a much smaller organisation. They might be about to invest in a new technology platform and realise they don't have the in-house skill set, so they're looking for advisors. So that sort of thing would go on to seek. And then if you see certain organisations putting out a lot of call for actions for volunteers, I wouldn't hesitate getting in touch with someone directly to offer what you feel your skill set and what you could offer.
Fantastic, great advice. Sean, Casey, any experience from your side that you'd like to share around finding the right non-profit or making that connection?
Yeah, generally I would say that there's a decent chance that people who your coworkers, those in the pre-sales space at your company, already have some very specific organizations that they support, some specific missions that they feel very powerful about. And I think that's really a great way to start, because when you have that natural alignment, then you already have that motivation really going into the engagement.
I think from my perspective, look, it's a different kind of response to this question, but I think that also understanding when it's not a fit. So you get in, you begin to have those conversations. You might kind of realize that what they're looking for is actually not in your skill set, or there's actually just what they actually need is they've said that they want maybe some technology advice, but really what they need is a strategic alignment all the way up, you know, and that's a different kind of problem. And so the kind of impact that you have is actually very, very limited. And particularly in these days, post-pandemic and everything else, we need to be very mindful about where we kind of put our energies. And so it's also kind of healthy to say, look, after evaluating it, I don't actually think that I can help you in the way that you need to be helped. This is what I would suggest. Once you do that, give me a call. I'd love to help. But I think that also being realistic that, you know, again, while we're well-intentioned, they may not always be ready for the help that we can offer, or ready for the help that they need. So being mindful of that, keeping that in mind, I think is also healthy for everyone involved.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, yeah, that's something to bear in mind. I think going in and trying to work with these organisations, and to the earlier sort of phrase, you know, do no harm, to make sure that we're working towards, we're not giving them tech debt, and we're not working towards, you know, creating a mess for the next person to come in and take over. So I think that's great. I don't see any other questions that are coming through, so I might sort of slowly get towards the end of our session. I guess, Casey, Kristen, Sean, any final advice for anyone in pre-sales and getting involved? I know we've touched on a few things like do no harm. We've talked about not using it as a way of just simply saying you're helping without actually doing anything, or making the right connection, or making the fit, just sort of driving your own agenda more so than the non-profits. Anything else you might want to add into that conversation?
I'll maybe just jump in to sort of say that from my experience, and while we know we should be open to changing their mindsets and opening their eyes a little bit too. I find that particularly coming from the commercial sector, when we start talking fundraising, you've heard me say this a million times, Chris, fundraising, sales aren't the same thing. So there's actually an entire sector and industry built around some of these concepts of fundraising and things like that. And I think that we need to be a little bit, as we're bringing an outside perspective, it's good, but I think we should also make sure that we are mindful that there is some, you know, domain knowledge that is worth, if not preserving, at least kind of respecting that that's a part of the change. So when we go in and say, oh yeah, the donation is just the same thing as like buying a product. Yeah, I would argue that it's not, for a lot of different reasons. So I think that being mindful to check some of our biases in that way is helpful.
So coming in humble, I guess, not assuming you know it from the outside, is probably the message there. And it sounds like I may have triggered you at some point, KC. Fantastic. Sean, Kristen, any advice from your perspective?
I echo what Casey said. Although we've said there's a real lack of skills in certain areas, particularly in the data and tech space, there's a wealth of knowledge, fantastic people. You know, there's a reason, you know, I will only ever now work in the not-for-profit sector. Having, you know, worked in the private sector for many, many, many years, I'll never go back. So there's, you know, wonderful benefits from working in the sector, you know, but there's also frustrations. It's not, you know, there's people struggling to make decisions. Money is incredibly tight. So even though the will might be there, it may not just happen. So don't get disheartened either if you do align yourself to an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Working on a shoestring is very different from it having simple operations. Even at low, mid, all the way up to the enterprise level, you have some tremendous complexity and that's also very different for each vertical within the industry. Arts and cultural is very different from universities, is very different from wilderness organizations, and so on. All of them are incredibly different, and it's really about understanding what is best going to benefit this organization.
Fantastic. I think that's some incredibly great advice for anyone looking to get into helping out, whether it's through pro bono, volunteering, or even joining the nonprofit industry. I think, as we all have, I'm sure all of us agree that it's a incredible space to be working in. Just as a final, I guess, on a similar topic, just to sort of give everyone some call to arms or call to action, in terms of where to get started. Kristen touched on it earlier on. There is a multitude of ways out there in the digital world for you to start getting involved. Seek Volunteer is a fantastic resource down here in Australia and New Zealand if you're looking to do that. Likewise, Volley is a great online resource to start looking at online and virtual volunteering and how you can get involved. But there's options globally. So joining us across APAC, you can look at places on online sites like Impact or our conjunct consulting up there in Asia and Singapore to really, they are focused on that skills-based volunteering process that we're going through. So volunteering in them is great. Our friends in India, we haven't forgotten you with I Volunteer, a great job board for anything happening across the India space. And there's obviously global organisations as well, places like Idealist or otherwise, to get involved with these sort of projects out there in the non-profit world. And I think just to summarise and wrap up today, look, first of all, I can't say it more, strongly. Volunteer now. Please go out, make a connection, make a contact, share the skills that you've got available within yourself or within your broader team, and see how you can partner up and support a non-profit organisation. Importantly, make sure you're committed. Make sure that it's not something you're going to walk away from because things got busy at work and you've left them holding the bag with a half-finished project. That doesn't help anyone and may in turn actually take up more resources to fix that project and deliver it than they originally had intended. And so you've committed not just your time, but you've committed them into being involved in the process. We've heard about all the skills that are needed. It's not just technology. It's not Salesforce. It's not Blackboard. It's not Microsoft. It really is generally not just technology, but it is those softer skills. We've touched on things like discovery, project management, delivery, consulting, data and analytics, vendor management. We've all got these skills in pre-sales. We may have strengths in one area versus another, but I think if you can, again, volunteer and share that capability map with an organization, they will absolutely get the right skills that they need to make an impact. Importantly, and these last two are probably very, very linked. Make it sure it's sustainable. Make sure it's not something you're lumping the nonprofit with that they have to maintain and invest in heavily to keep that process going. It's no point coding something from scratch and giving them 6 months of your life to sit there and say, now you must manage it whilst you walk away. Again, that implies a lot on those organisations, and more importantly, do no harm. These organisations are not here for the purpose of us. They're not here for our own good wishes and self congratulatory messages. They're here to serve a mission for the organisation, for their organisation, and more importantly to the community. So making sure that you're not taking away from that core mission is key for things there. But with that, a couple of final things. We have done our audience Q&A, so we'll move on. A very brief advertorial here for the PreSales podcast that is available every Monday through your typical podcasting channels. So please get on there. Some fantastic speakers through there. As a quick reminder, if you're not already connected into the PreSales Collective, please join our channel on Slack. Keep the conversations going there. We have our APAC channel available, as well as our global online forums to get involved. And so please do that. And details are available on our PreSales Collective website, and the URL is right there. As a bit of forward sizzle, I guess, upcoming webinars, we have the future of integration and automation convergence. So automation, we heard today, is a really sometimes low-hanging fruit, but a really powerful thing for nonprofits. So that would be a great thing to take some of the learnings from that and provide it into a nonprofit as well. I also know there is another one coming in for the APAC team around pursuing pre-sales career as a graduate hire. So if anyone is earlier in their pre-sales career or potentially starting to finish off with university, that is a great session to join, hosted by the illustrious Jonas Lim. So something to look forward to. And with that, I will say thank you. I want to say a big special thank you to all three of our panelists. You've been phenomenal. Casey, Sean, Kristen, I can't thank you enough for your time today and over the last week or two as we've got together and prepared for today. I also want to say thank you for your impact in the nonprofit world. I know not just selling, working, doing your day job, but I think, whatever we do, I know you all go above and beyond in your roles to make sure that you do, help with the mission of the organizations you touch, each and every day or each and every week. And so thank you again for your time and your willingness to be involved in today. And with that, I think I will say thank you and goodbye. So thanks for your time, folks, and we'll see you next time.
See you.